Daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a position with the operative clause. The petitioners call upon the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to use its powers over the Board of Commissioners of Public Utilities, which is the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, to deny any general rate application presented by NSBI requesting a rate increase in 2013 and 2014. And there are 100 signatures, and I have affixed my signature to the petition.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day that I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas after 42 years of service with the Halifax Regional Police, Chief Frank Beasley retired in October 2012. And whereas although Chief Beasley is retired, his efforts will continue to be fully fulfilled by the province, municipality, and law enforcement by working together to address issues and ensure citizens feel safe and secure. And whereas Halifax Regional Police recently appointed a new chief, Jean-Michel Blais, who will bring years of dedicated experience and expertise to this leadership role. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize Chief Beasley's years of service to Halifax Regional Municipality and welcome Chief Jean-Michel Blais in his new role with the Halifax Regional Police. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November is Lung Cancer Awareness Month, and on average 394 Canadians die every week from lung cancer, and 450 Canadians are diagnosed with lung cancer on a weekly basis. And whereas lung cancer is caused by many lifestyle and environmental factors such as smoking tobacco or long-term exposure to secondhand smoke and air pollution, and whereas lung cancer continues to be a leading cause of death for both men and women, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in marking November as Lung Cancer Awareness Month and show leadership in making healthy lifestyle choices. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill and act to amend Chapter 450 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Summary Proceedings Act, respecting interprovincial investigative authority.
The Honourable Minister of Justice begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 450 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Summary Proceedings Act, respecting interprovincial investigative authority.
Thanks. Bill number 115, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 450 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Summary Proceedings Act, respecting interprovincial investigative authority.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish the Office of the Environmental Ombudsperson.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish the Office of the Environmental Ombudsman.
Bill number 116, entitled An Act to Establish the Office of the Environmental Ombudsman.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Exempt Property of the Anne Murray Centre in the town of Spring Hill from municipal taxes.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Exempt Property of the Anne Murray Centre in the town of Spring Hill from municipal taxes.
Bill number 117, entitled An Act to Exempt Property of the Anne Murray Centre in the town of Spring Hill from municipal taxes.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I now recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to enter into negotiations with the Government of Canada to create a federal regulating body on offshore petroleum safety standards.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to enter into negotiations with the Government of Canada to create a federal regulatory body on offshore petroleum safety standards.
Bill number 118, entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to enter into negotiations with the Government of Canada to create a federal regulating body on offshore petroleum safety standards.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Diamond Jubilee celebrations are being held throughout 2012 to recognize the 60th anniversary of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's reign. And whereas $62,000 commemorative scholarships under the Diamond Jubilee Award, one for each year of the Queen's reign, are awarded to graduating grade 12 students who have demonstrated leadership and made significant contributions to their community and province. And whereas Haley Marchand of Richmond Academy received a Diamond Jubilee Scholarship in recognition of her commitment to sports, membership on her school's hockey, dance, prom, and yearbook committees, and volunteer work with the Shelby Shines On Acts of Kindness Society, as well as the Ladies Auxiliary for Our Lady of Assumption Parish in Arishat. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Haley Marchand on receiving the Diamond Jubilee Scholarship for being a positive role model in her school and community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. A little bit of chatter going on here this evening. I'd much rather the members would take that outside the chamber so I can listen clearly to the resolutions. Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the community of Diligent River gathered with pride and a sense of accomplishment on Sunday, November 4th at the official unveiling of their new War Memorial Monument. And whereas Gail Boland, who spearheaded the project, was researching Diligent River Roots, her book on local history, when she observed a framed certificate on the wall of the Diligent River United Baptist Church that identified the community's Second World War veterans and started with the idea of a monument listing all of the community's veterans. And whereas local artist Arlene Collins prepared sketches of the monument, which will include veterans from the communities of Diligent River, Ramshead River, York Settlement, and Wharton, and recognizes 61 local veterans, 17 from World War I, 38 from World War II, 5 from the Korean War, and 1 peacekeeper. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Gail Boland, Arlene Collins, and the community of Diligent River on their outstanding achievement, and join them in remembering those veterans that gave so much for all of us. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Halifax Metro Centre hosted the 2012 Canada-Russia Challenge in August, a series in which both nations' junior teams played 2 games in Russia and 2 games in Canada to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the 1972 Summit Series, and whereas the Halifax Metro Centre is home to the Halifax Mooseheads, who are currently the #1 hockey team in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, who were on a 13-game winning streak and attracting an average of 8,000 fans at their home games so far this season. And whereas the Halifax Metro Centre hosted Canada's NBA team, the Toronto Raptors, for an inter-squad game on October the 6th, raising $56,000 for local charitable organizations. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Halifax Metro Centre and Trade Centre Limited staff on its success in attracting and hosting world-class sporting and entertainment events to Halifax. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas backbench NDP MLA for Kings North chose to make an unprovoked and personal attack against one of the current longest-serving members of this legislature. And whereas the rarely seen or heard from backbench MLA for Kings North, first elected in 2009, can only dream of having the electoral success of the member he personally attacked. And whereas if the backbench NDP MLA for Kings North, NDP caucus staff, or anyone else in the NDP party is truly interested in looking through history for elected members who have faced criminal convictions, they need look no further than within the current and past NDP caucus. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly join me in reminding the backbench MLA for Kings North and all NDP MLAs of the wise saying, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
The motion is tabled. The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 19th, family and friends of Peter Jack McLean gathered at the Christmas Ireland Fire Hall to celebrate Peter's 99th birthday. And whereas the traditional music of Gaelic Cape Breton has always been a part of Peter Jack's life, so much so that while living in New England, he spent his days as a carpenter and his nights as a fiddler and Gaelic singer. And whereas as a member of the Iona Gaelic Singers, Peter has encouraged and entertained a generation of Gaelic learners and is always willing to share a story. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Peter Jack McLean on his 99th birthday and wish him good health and happiness in the years ahead. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
And with your leave, before I read this resolution, I'd like to do an introduction. In your gallery, you'll see the Honourable George Archibald, who has graced the halls of this House many times and is now looking down from aloft in his role as Commodore of the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron. With him is Ed Steeves, the Vice Commodore, Star Vickery and Stuart Andrews, both of the Trustee Committee, David Archibald, and Kevin Hurd, who's a well-known general manager of the very distinguished club, which I am proud to say shares the shores of my constituency, is well known. So the resolution that I'd like to read, actually, Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron, founded in 1837, is the oldest continuously operating yacht club in North America and one of the oldest in the world, and one of only 7 worldwide privileged to carry the title of Royal Yacht Squadron. And whereas sailors from the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron have represented their club, this province and Canada in competition at home and abroad with regular success and great distinction, bringing back both Olympic and Paralympic medals to Halifax. And whereas the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron sponsors 2 international ocean races of some venerability, the biennial Marblehead Halifax race, and in alternate years the Halifax to Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon race, each bringing more than 120 yachts to the province on each occasion. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron on its 175th anniversary and extend to its members their best wishes for continued success on the water and a long and prosperous future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice for passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this evening's proceedings. We will now recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation Ride for Diabetes Research is an exciting and unique fundraising event that brings together the business community in a friendly and spirited event to raise money for diabetes research. And whereas on Friday, November 2nd, the 2012 Ride for Research was held at the World Trade and Convention Centre in Halifax, one of 22 rides scheduled to be held across Canada in 2012. And whereas hundreds of individuals representing businesses in Halifax and throughout Nova Scotia raised close to $50,000 for this most worthwhile cause. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Legislature extend our appreciation to the participants of the 2012 Halifax Ride for Diabetes Research, Ride Coordinator Wendy Sampson from JDRF Halifax, the staff at JDRF, and the countless volunteers who made the 2012 Ride for Diabetes Research such an outstanding success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyle.
Monsieur le Président, à une date ultérieure, je demande l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que le 19 septembre, le ministre de la Justice a nommé Timothy Landry des Buttes-Amiraux juge des tribunaux provinciaux et des affaires familiales en Nouvelle-Écosse. Attendu que Tim Landry possède une solide expérience en droit pénal et à la fois familial, avec plus de 20 ans d'expérience, ayant été un avocat interne avec Nova Scotia Legal Aid à Yarmouth depuis 1994. Et attendu que Tim Landry est membre de la communauté acadienne, il servira tous les néo-écossais, tant en français qu'en anglais, et représentera les tribunaux de Digby, de Comoville et d'Annapolis Royal. Par conséquent, qu'il soit résolu de tous les membres de cette Assemblée se joignent à moi pour féliciter le juge Timothy Landry pour sa nomination et lui souhaite beaucoup de succès dans son nouveau poste et dans son avenir. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on September 19th, the Justice Minister appointed Timothy Landry of Amiros Hill as a judge of the Nova Scotia Provincial and Family Courts. And whereas Tim Landry has a strong background in both criminal and family law with over 20 years experience as a staff lawyer with Nova Scotia Legal Aid in Yarmouth since 1994. And whereas Tim Landry is a member of the Acadian community and will be able to serve all Nova Scotians in both French and English and represent the courts in Digby, Comoville, and Annapolis Royal. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Judge Timothy Landry on his appointment and wish him much success in his new position. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sports Nova Scotia presented the 2012 RICO Provincial Sports Award on June 2nd, 2012 at the Marriott Harbour Hotel in Halifax in front of over 500 members of the sports community. And whereas the award ceremony recognizes the achievements of more than 220 athletes, coaches, officials, sponsors, sports association and volunteers across the province. And whereas the provincial organization for karate named Tristan DeVoe of Clare as their 2012 Female Athlete of the Year. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Tristan DeVoe on this prestigious award and wish her continued success in future athletic endeavors. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas an Inverness County priest has had an Ontario school named in his honour, and whereas Father John Donald McClellan of Dunvegan passed away in 2008, but in Durham County, a school called Father Donald McClellan Catholic Secondary School now bears his name. And whereas 100 guests, including childhood friends from Cape Breton, Isidore Chesson, Father Gus McLeod, and Father Donnie's sisters Marcella and Jessie were on hand in May when the school was blessed. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge Father Donnie McClellan's legacy as a champion for young people, and may his compassionate work continue at the school. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford, Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Bantam girls baseball team is comprised of many of the best players in the province, and whereas at the Canadian Bantam Girls International Invitational held in Bedford in August 2012, the Nova Scotia team fought every step of the way in a dramatic game to edge out the Chicago Pioneers 7-6 and claim the bronze medal. And whereas not only did the team take bronze, but their catcher, Jenna Jackson, was awarded the Catcher of the Tournament award for the second year in a row. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate all members of the team and their coaches, Brandon Gunnett, John McGuinness, Tyler Newcomb, and Natasha Burgess, for a game well played and on their bronze medal win, and wish them continued success in future competitions. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dave Hurley, also known as General John Cabatrell, lost his battle with cancer last week, was one of the greatest ambassadors for Cape Breton Island and will be greatly missed. And whereas an accomplished broadcaster, actor, writer, recording artist, provincial employee, tour guide, teaching assistant, and well-known comedian for more than 30 years as General John Cabatrell, Dave made people laugh across Canada as he poked fun at politicians and made light of news with his quirky sense of humour and quick wit. And whereas Dave connected with his audience because of his unabashed love of Cape Breton, his tremendous facility with language, and his ability to turn a phrase such as he put it, down went the causeway, or grandma got run over by a reindeer. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly join me in a moment of silence for the last curtain call for Dave Harley, Nova Scotia's General John Cabatrell. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. We'll now have a moment of silence. Thank you. For those of you that have been around a long time, I realize that we did have that gentleman here one time for the speaker's dinner. It was quite an entertaining evening, and long remembered for those members that have been here for a while. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Joan Glode, a proud and respected member of the Mi'kmaq First Nation community of Acadia, was one of the first people from the community to graduate with a master's degree from the Maritime School of Social Work, and whereas Dr. Glode spent 20 years as the founding director and executive director of Mi'kmaq Family and Children's Services of Nova Scotia, and has held positions with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, Indian and Northern Affairs, and the Native Friendship Centre, and whereas Dr. Glode has served on various national and provincial boards, and her work has been recognized nationally with a Queen's Silver Jubilee Medal, the Order of Canada, and the National Aboriginal Achievement Award for Public Service. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly thank this remarkable lady who has dedicated her life's work to advocating and working for Aboriginal families and children, and congratulate her for receiving an honorary degree from Mount St. Vincent University to add to her long list of achievements and honours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today marks the beginning of Veterans Week, and whereas during this important week we take time to recognize the achievements of our veterans and honour those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom, and whereas we wear poppies to show our enduring gratitude for everything they have done, and promise to protect their legacy so all future generations know of their tremendous contribution. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly pay tribute to our veterans and let them know just how grateful we are for the extraordinary sacrifices they made for us. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass this without debate. There
has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Gary Johnson has spent most of his life volunteering in various youth sport activities, and in 1981-82 he joined the City of Lakes Boxing Club, where he became a boxing assistant. And whereas many of the youth who participate in the club are children from broken homes and those with problems who come from all over metro area, and it was for this reason that Gary Johnson was awarded the Dartmouth Volunteer of the Year some time ago. Whereas Gary Johnson has met with most success in training these young boxers, and his own son, Kirk Johnson, became the world amateur junior champ and Olympic contender, as well as Costio Clayton, who has represented the Commonwealth Games in India, senior world champion representative, and Olympic contender. Therefore, be resolved that members of this House join me in recognizing the many contributions Gary Johnson has made to the youth of Halifax Regional Municipality. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Badek Arm of Gold Shriners Club presented a $2,500 donation towards the Exceptional Care for Exceptional Children fundraising campaign, and whereas this campaign supports the construction of a Shriners Children facility to be included in the McGill University Healthcare Complex, and whereas this complex will bring together research and services which are currently spread across 5 McGill hospitals and institutes, and fosters excellence in patient care, research, education, and technology assessment. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly thank Club President Scott Williamson and all members of the Arm of Gold Shriners Club for their donation to the Exceptional Care for Exceptional Children fundraising campaign. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today marks the beginning of Veterans Week in Canada, a time to honour the achievements of our veterans and remember especially those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. And whereas many groups and organizations go above and beyond to help citizens in their time of need, such as paramedics, firefighters, and members of all police services. And whereas the Main Street Business District Association annually honours all those citizens who serve communities at home and abroad with a ceremony near the beginning of Veterans Week. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly recognize the work of the Main Street Business District Association on holding their third annual tribute to veterans and those who serve on Saturday, November 3rd, and thank them for ensuring that those who are there for us are not forgotten. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyll.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in early June, the Argyll Township Courthouse Archives in Tuscott was the recipient of the Dr. Phyllis Blakely Award in recognition of its outstanding contribution to archives in Nova Scotia. And whereas archivist Peter Crowell received the award on behalf of the archives for a project entitled An Acadian Parish Reborn, which resulted in 2 surviving pre-deportation Catholic parish registers from Saint-Anne-du-Ruisseau and Wedgeport being fully indexed and placed on the internet. And whereas Jennifer Surratt, who is now a teacher, worked for the archives for 7 consecutive summers as an archival assistant and managed much of the project that covered the first 50 years of records from 1799 to 1849. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Argyll Township Courthouse Archives on receiving this award and thank Peter Crowell and Jennifer Surratt for their hard work and dedication to the preservation of our Acadian heritage. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Saturday, November 3rd, a fundraiser was held at the Lake Vaughan Fire Hall in memory of Donald Rennard, a charter member of the Lake Vaughan Volunteer Fire Department who passed away last year. And whereas the goal of this fundraiser was to raise enough funds to purchase a propane stove and tank to allow the Lake Vaughan Comfort Centre to provide hot meals to the community in the event of an emergency. And whereas this event raised over $5,000 toward Donald Rennard's mission of completing the Lake Vaughan Comfort Centre, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly recognize and thank the organizers of this fundraiser and the members of the community who supported it, and especially the late Don Rennard, a man who always so graciously and selflessly gave to his community, and his vision was the inspiration for this fundraiser. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the following resolution. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jeremy Pike, a songwriter from Pleasant Bay, continues to have great success in his musical endeavours. And whereas Jeremy is a 35-year-old singer-songwriter originally from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, now living in Pleasant Bay, who has a passion for music and from a young age has experimented with a wide range of musical styles. And whereas Pike was recently featured on a reality TV program on the Country Music Television Network called Big in a Small Town. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly acknowledge the success of Jeremy Pike, a small-town singer and songwriter determined to make it big and bring interest to the town of Pleasant Bay. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas we are all aware of the importance to keep our seniors mobile for the best quality of life, and whereas Transport Declare President Clarendon Robichaud was aware of the demand for such a door-to-door service in Digby and area, And whereas on October the 13th, 2012, Transport Declare expanded its services and officially opened a Digby and area division providing the residents with this wonderful service. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Transport Declare for their expansion into Digby and area and wish them many years of continued success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I also move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Emma Simpson, a North Sydney teenager, was presented with the Caring Canadian Award by Business Leader and Order of Canada Officer Annette Bashirn on behalf of Governor General David Jackson. And whereas Emma was personally raised more than $40,000 for the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation and has spoken at various events on the importance of self-examination and early detection in the battle against breast cancer, as well as volunteering for the Salvation Army Red Kettle Campaign, the George McNeil Scholarship Fund, and countless other community projects. And whereas the Governor General's Caring Canadian Award recognizes living Canadians and permanent residents who have made a significant, sustained, and unpaid contribution to their community and Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Emma Simpson on receiving the Caring Canadian Award and thank her for giving back to her community and her caring spirit. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sports Nova Scotia presented the 2012 RICO Provincial Sports Award on June 2nd, 2012 at the Marriott Harbour Hotel in Halifax in front of over 500 members of the sports community, and whereas the awards ceremony recognizes the achievements of more than 220 athletes, coaches, officials, sponsors, sports association, and volunteers across the province. And whereas the provincial organization for karate named Tyler DeVoe of Clare as their 2012 Male Athlete of the Year, therefore it be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Tyler DeVoe on this prestigious award and wish him continued success in future athletic endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Barton Consolidated Schools celebrated the achievement of its Heritage Fair Award winners on May the 25th. Whereas award winners were Hannah Foote Cromwell, Macy DeVoe, Kayla Foote, Jericho Hill, James McNeil, Rayleigh Amon, Caitlin Marshall, Amber White, Michaela Gochi, Jordan Amiro, Megan Gosson, Josh Marshall, McKaylee Fyander, Isabel Weber, and Jordan Sullivan. And whereas students Meadow Carmen and Kaylee Marshall also received recognition and awards at the regional fair held in Yarmouth, with Carmen's project being recognized at the regional, provincial, and national levels, and has been chosen to compete against projects from across Canada. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate these students on their awards and wish them all the success in the future years to come. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Angus McCaskill was a Nova Scotia giant whose feats of strength and gentle heart gained him international notoriety. And whereas McCaskill's Dining Room on the Dartmouth waterfront opened in 1986 and was originally themed for the same Nova Scotia legend. And whereas after 26 years in business, McCaskill's waterfront restaurant closed its doors for the last time on October 27th. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate owner Alan Johnson and the staff of McCaskill's on their many years in business and wish them all the best in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Masstown Market in Colchester North has been named as the recipient of a National Heritage Award by the Canadian Federation of Independent Grocers, and whereas the Jennings family, owners of the Masstown Market, were presented with the Arnold Rands Heritage Award during the 50th Annual Canadian Independent Grocer of the Year Awards ceremony in Toronto, and whereas this very successful business, which promotes locally grown produce and products, is not only a grocery store, but also a dairy, corn maze, a bar, a restaurant, a gift shop, a liquor store, an internet cafe, a deli, a garden center, a fish market, and a bakery with employing over 100 employees. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Jennings family for winning the award, recognize the many services they provide to their customers, and express our appreciation for the many forms of support that they generously give to locally, provincially, and national folks. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Premier's handed out $500 million in taxpayers' money to 6 companies with no job guarantees, with no assurance that taxpayers will ever see this money again. Whereas the Premier has written these multi-million-dollar checks to big corporations at the same time, he has hiked taxes, fees, and gutted the essential programs such as education. Whereas after receiving $500 million in taxpayers' money, 3 of them shut down or went bankrupt, 1 of them is on brink of closure, and all 6 have laid off employees. Therefore resolved, the member for Halifax Atlantic still supports the Premier. This misguided approach, and that the Premier cannot grow the economy by simply writing blank checks to big corporations, and he must end his corporate handouts and begin work on growing the economies in communities all across the province. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. I will now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 18-year-old Nicholas Harris, who has struggled with juvenile idiopathic arthritis since the age of 2, not only participated in the 3rd annual Walk to Fight Arthritis fundraiser in Halifax in 2012, but was also named Walk Hero and won first prize for his entry in the Arthritis Society's National No JA video contest about his experience with this disease. And whereas Nicholas Harris is a recipient of a 2012 Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Award, a commemorative scholarship for graduating grade 12 students who have demonstrated leadership and made significant contributions to their communities and the province. And whereas Nicholas Harris was named the 2012 recipient of the Richard Conrad Scholarship, awarded annually to the son or daughter of a Steel Auto Group employee, and is attending Dalhousie University this fall, enrolled in the Bachelor of Science program. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Nicholas Harris on his positive attitude and his determination to pursue his life goals despite the challenges presented by living with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day. Thank you. I move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ron Doucette has been a devoted supporter and volunteer of the Yarmouth Liberal Association for many years, and whereas Mr. Doucette is always a cheerful and helpful presence at meetings and events, and whereas Mr. Doucette's commitment to the Liberal Party has been a significant help and encouragement to candidates, whether he's assisting with transportation during canvassing, putting up signs, or manning the phones. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly recognize Ron Doucette for his dedication and commitment to the Yarmouth Liberal Association, the Nova Scotia Liberal Party, the Liberal Party of Canada, and for so happily giving his time and energy to his community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Gordon Morris of Berwick was honoured in June 2012 as an inductee into the Berwick Sports Hall of Fame, and whereas Gordy played hockey in his early years, later turning to curling as his passion, and is remembered for building sports in the Berwick area. And whereas minor sports of all levels benefited greatly from his generosity and support, as Gordy gave freely as a player, sponsor, mentor, and friend, therefore inspired players of all ages. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize posthumously Gordon Morris of Berwick on his induction into the Berwick Sports Hall of Fame in June 2012. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, earlier in resolutions, the member from Richmond brought forward a resolution, and many times in the body of that resolution, he used the word backbench or backbencher, and it's my recollection that that is not a word that's in order. It's been often ruled out of order in this House, and I would ask you to look at that and rule upon it, Mr. Speaker.
I will take that under advisement and report back to the House as soon as I can. The Honourable Government House Leader on government business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 94?
Bill 94, House of Assembly Act. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and just going to say a few words. A few words on this bill before we vote on it. I understand shortly. This has been an interesting process. Like a number of like the member for Argyll and member for Richmond, I was a member of the Select Committee, and we, of course, traveled the province as an all-party committee to listen to what Nova Scotians wanted included in this. And part of me wonders, as we came to the end of it, you know, why we bothered, because we didn't listen to what those Nova Scotians said. You know, we spent a lot of money. Mr. Speaker, I remember the discussions with your office about the budget and trying to figure it out so we could provide translation in as many places as possible. I remember that, you know, we tried to, many of us drove back and forth significant distances to avoid costs of hotels and so forth. I drove in a snowstorm along with a number of other people up to Sydney. I know the Minister of Justice did the same to be there so that we could listen to people. And I was at all but the meeting in Yarmouth. I think it was in Yarmouth, but I was at all but the meeting in Yarmouth because I was here that night for a debate. And at every one of them, we heard presentations by people who felt that protecting the so-called protected ridings was extremely important. And I think that when you hear so many Nova Scotians coming out and speaking to that issue, to then come out with the terms of reference just days before the deadline on New Year's Eve that ignored that is disappointing. And it was disappointing and surprising for many Nova Scotians. And so then, of course, the new committee was appointed, or the commission was appointed, and they went around and they heard the same thing. In fact, they heard it in even louder numbers, and they came out with a report. And the first draft of their report, well, you know, wasn't, I don't think there's too many people that felt, oh, it's perfect, it got everything right. But if you listen to the commentary after that report versus the commentary after the next report, there was a huge difference. The commentary after the first report was widely accepting of the recommendation that the protected ridings be kept. I might also add, Mr. Speaker, that shortly after New Year's, the opposition members of that committee had asked for all the minutes of those meetings to be released. And I think that this is critical. And I'm, to be perfectly honest, I don't recall if the government opposed that or they didn't oppose that, but the committee had become dissolved because the term of their mandate was after the report was filed by December 31st. We all went on our way and the committee ceased to exist, and the committee no longer actually had the power to release its own minutes. And so Nova Scotians are stuck in a situation where they can't even go back and read the minutes of those discussions. And I'd be happy to have those out there, you know, the transcripts, the Hansard from the, and I think they should be out there so that people know the discussions that happened.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely important for Nova Scotians to know what happened, and I firmly believe that it's in the power of the government to release the Hansard from that period. The committee couldn't do it because we no longer existed. You know, we sort of all seemed to agree by email that that should happen, but you know, we suddenly really, I think the advice came from the clerk or from legislative council, I don't remember, that we didn't have the power to do it ourselves. So, fine, I mean, we have to follow the rules. You know, this has been a long time coming, why the protected ridings became as they were. And you know, a lot of other people have given a much more eloquent history on those than I could ever give, and I'm not going to try and repeat that. Suffice to say that, you know, we submitted a dissenting report that provided some, you know, quoted from some Supreme Court judgments and quoted from the recommendations of previous commissions of this legislature, talking about why those were important and why that was allowable. You know, some of the things that we even talked about was, well, maybe the variance should be lower than 20. Let's have the protected ridings, but reduce the variance if that's an issue for all other ridings. You know, there were a number of solutions put out on the table, but it seemed, or it certainly felt, I mean, I attended all the meetings that we had of the committee to discuss what would be in that final report, and it wasn't until right at the end, right in sort of that week before Christmas, week after Christmas, that we suddenly found ourselves in a situation where there were two different interpretations of a line, and that's where we come to this notwithstanding issue. There has been a lot said about changes that subsequent. So, of course, the committee came out, or the commission came out with this new interim report, if you will. And that new interim report talked about the issue of, or it made some new recommendations. It split Yarmouth. You know, it took communities outside of their sphere of influence in a number of areas of the province. There were issues in the Pictou. I know, Mr. Speaker, there were concerns from residents in your own riding. There were concerns in my riding. There were concerns because one of the largest, in fact, the statistics show the largest Acadian community in Metro was split in half. And so, you know, a number of people went, made presentations, and another report came out. And again, we have a situation where, whether it's in Shelburne, there were people who felt that they had no idea this was coming. In the Antigonish area, in the community of Grand Havre, there were people who felt, well, hold it, we didn't know that our community was disappearing. In my own riding, there's a neighborhood that suddenly disappeared from the riding that had been part of it for a long time, and you know, suddenly people started writing letters into the commission. Of course, the commission didn't exist anymore, and it's almost like when we tried to present minutes, when we tried to have the minutes brought out and made public, the committee didn't exist. And suddenly when members of the public were writing in letters and trying to have their voice heard about issues, whether it's in Shelburne or in the Antigonish area or in my own riding, I saw some of the response. And I'm sorry, the commission no longer exists. You'll now have to go to the legislature with that. Had we listened, had the committee filed a report that fairly represented the concerns that were raised at every single one of those meetings, or even not having that, had the government accepted the first interim report of the commission, a lot of these issues would have been solved, because that first interim report more fairly represented the concerns that are being raised across the province It didn't split Shelburne. It didn't take out, split the Acadian area in my riding. Now that was fixed by the time we got to the final one. It didn't do any, it didn't split Yarmouth as was proposed at one point. And I don't understand why it was determined that this battle should be waged at this time. Oh,
the honourable member for Richmond on an introduction.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à mon collègue de Dartmouth East pour me permettre de faire cette présentation. Monsieur le Président, ce soir, dans la Galerie de l'Est, nous avons avec nous des représentants de la communauté acadienne. Je demanderai de se lever une fois que je les présente. Nous avons Monsieur Justin Murray, président de la Fédération acadienne de Nouvelle-Écosse, Marie-Claude Rioux, directrice générale de la Fédération acadienne de Nouvelle-Écosse, et Céleste Godin, représentante de l'Acadie au Centre de la francophonie des Amériques. Monsieur le Président, ils sont ici ce soir pour suivre le débat sur le projet de loi 94 et aussi le vote qui prendra place après le débat. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to introduce some guests in our East Gallery today. Mr. Justin Murray, President of the Acadian Federation, Marie-Claude Rioux, Director General of the Acadian Federation, and Céleste Godin, representing the Acadian Centre of the Francophonie des Amériques. And I would ask members of the House to extend them a warm welcome.
Welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this evening's proceedings. I would like to thank the honourable member for Dartmouth East for allowing that, and now I will recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to do so. I understand that most members are almost here for voting on this, so I wanted to just wrap up with a couple of thoughts while we wait for them to get in their seats. Mr. Speaker, there is Mr. Speaker, this is about communities of interest, and let's be fair. It's not an easy task. It can be a complicated task to put together the communities and figure out which ones have the best relationships. And is a church congregation relationship more important than the shopping destination, or is it business relations? There's all kinds of things that create communities of interest. But Mr. Speaker, in that first the Commission's first interim report, they did a pretty good job of it. Now, listen, there were problems. Like I could pick out a couple issues in mine, and I know that other members had a couple issues in theirs, and there were some but generally speaking, they were all fairly small things. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, I think as we come to the end of this process, you know, we still have law amendments before us. I know the Law Amendments Committee is going to Shelburne. I think that's a great idea. But they should also be going to Digby, which has now addressed concerns with the last one, to Antigonish, which has addressed concerns, and to some of the other areas which have also raised similar concerns now in reasonably large numbers. There's no reason to just go to Yarmouth and not go to these other communities if you're going to take law amendments on the road. And so I encourage the committee to make sure that happens. The other thing as we go forward is the Commission, in the last pages of their report, made recommendations that are not addressed in this bill. And that was about the issues were issues about representation and voting and all that sort of thing. Those are also issues which need to be addressed at some point. And I was actually surprised not to see the first steps in the bill. As we move forward, it's going to be incredibly important that those issues are addressed. We only need to look at the turnout in the recent municipal elections to know that is continued. Voter turnout has decreased, and that has to be a concern to all of us. And one of the things, when you look at voter turnout historically, It's related to whether people feel connected to the issues. And I really believe that the more we divide communities of interest, the more we run into a problem of having people say, well, why does my voice matter? The more that we don't listen to people when we actually go out on the road and ask them what they think, the more that we issue reports that don't follow what they say, the less likely they are to get involved in the future, because they say, well, you're not going to listen to me anyway. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, I heard the Minister of Justice last week say that maybe there needs to be a better way of doing this process in the future, and he's right. He's absolutely right. You know, there's probably more cost-effective ways. There's probably better ways to engage people. But one of the most important ways to get people involved is to actually listen to what they say when you're out there. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I think everybody's here. Yeah. So, with that, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to this going forward. I really hope Law Amendments Committee goes to the other communities that are affected and wish to see Law Amendments Committee there. It's not fair to just go to one place, and we'll see where this goes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice, it'll be to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to just thank the members for all their comments over the last few days in this area. And I request that we move to second reading of Bill 94.
The question is for second reading of Bill 94, House of Assembly Act. Is the House ready for the question? Recorded vote has been called for. Are the whips satisfied? Yes. I will now ask the clerks to take a recorded vote.
Mr. Landry?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Peterson-Rayfuse?
Yes.
Mr. Corbett?
Yes.
Mr. Dexter?
Yes.
Ms. Maureen McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Paris?
Yes.
Ms. Jennings?
Yes.
Mr. McDonnell?
Yes.
Mr. Beliveau?
Yes.
Mr. Boudreau?
Yes.
Ms. Zan?
Yes.
Ms. Kent?
Yes.
Ms. Conrad? Is she absent? Mr. Pereira?
Yes.
Mr. Parker?
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon?
Yes.
Ms. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. Steele?
Yes.
Mr. Epstein?
Aye.
Mr. Estabrooks?
Aye.
Mr. Press?
Yes.
Mr. Ramey?
Yes.
Mr. Skabar?
Yes.
Mr. Wynot?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Ms. Birdsall?
Yes.
Mr. Burrell? Mr. Manning McDonald? Mr. Gadet?
No.
Mr. Glavine?
No.
Ms. Whalen?
No.
Mr. McNeil?
No.
Mr. Sampson?
No.
Mr. D'Entremont?
No and no.
Mr. Bailey?
No.
Mr. Bain?
No.
Mr. Porter?
No.
Mr. McMaster?
No.
Mr. Orrell?
No.
Mr. Younger?
No.
Ms. Reagan?
No.
Ms. Casey?
No.
Mr. Caldwell?
No.
Mr. Zink?
No.
Mr. Terrio?
No.
Mr. McClellan?
No.
Mr. Churchill?
No.
Those in favor of the motion, 28. Those contrary, 19.
Motion is carried. Order that Bill 94, House of Assembly Act, be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 97, Fairer Power Rates Act?
Bill number 97, Fairer Power Rates Act. I will now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I began speaking on this bill the other day and adjourned debate. And when I left off, I was talking about the efficiency tax and the fact that this government, several days before the election, promised that they would not make Nova Scotians place. Well, they're not always very good on promises, and sometimes they promise things, and sometimes they promise not to do things, and then they do the exact opposite. In this particular case, they promised that they would not make Nova Scotians pay for that program. And that's exactly what they did. They put it directly onto power bills. Now, don't get me wrong, efficiency programs are important, and energy efficiency is very important. In fact, after my husband and I got married, once we sold my house, we bought a house that was an R2000 house, and it was wonderful. I was very pleased with how little we paid back then for our heat, which it was oil, and it was an R2000. In fact, it was the most fuel-efficient house built in Nova Scotia in 1993. It had won an award for that. But unfortunately for us, we outgrew that house, had another child, and that kind of meant that we had to move to a regular one. But to a house that didn't have those kinds of extra efficiencies built in. So we're people who have taken advantage of the efficiency programs, but quite frankly, the problem is that we could afford to make those changes on our own. The fact is that there's lots of Nova Scotians who need to make those changes, who need to make those efficiencies, and they can't afford to because they have to put the money out in front. And they're also paying for this program, so they get a double whammy, and that's hardly fair. We feel, the Nova Scotia Liberal Party feels, that Nova Scotia Power should pay for the efficiency tax instead of overburdened electricity customers who, quite frankly, are already paying enough. And you know, it's one of the issues that I've actually had the most letters on since I've been elected. And I have a letter here from a constituent who, it turned out, just lives down the road from me. And he sent he sent a letter to me, and he sent a letter to the Premier. And he said a number of things in that letter, and I thought they were quite interesting. He said that Nova Scotians are not interested in NSP's various and international projects. And he said, we all want less expensive electricity, and we want it now. And he said that the NSP runaway gravy train must be stopped now. Every NSP customer should be infuriated to the point of writing to you demanding that the status of this province's sole generator, supplier, and a distributor of electrical power be reverted to that of a public utility, which is what it basically is. And I won't read you his whole letter, but he had a lot of good points there. And in fact, he was so infuriated that he took the power petition door to door and had people sign it. And absolutely. We'll pass that along and have that tabled. He was so infuriated that he went door to door and asked people to sign that petition. And this is someone who's been in business across the country, in other countries. He was very irritated, I have to say, at what was going on, and he didn't think it was good for Nova Scotians. In this session, Liberal leader Stephen McNeil has introduced legislation that forces Nova Scotia Power to set performance standards around reliability and imposes significant fines on Nova Scotia Power for outages that occur when those standards aren't met. And in fact, my friend who wrote to me talked about that too. We need Nova Scotia Power to be subject to the toughest regulations possible.
Order, please. Order. Well, remind the honourable member it's improper to refer to another member by their name in any way during any proceedings in the House. This includes notices of motions while reading from documents such as newspaper stories. You mentioned the honourable member's name. I know it's Monday, but I will now recognize the honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Sorry, the member for Annapolis. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't sure who that was that I had referred to there. Basically, we want more regulations to protect Nova Scotian ratepayers, and I know that the NDP has been saying that we want less regulation, but they're confused, and that's not all that unusual. Nova Scotia's monopoly does not have to compete for business, and the quality of service and reliability is lagging. You know, recently I had the opportunity to attend a session where Don Regan of Berwick Power came in and talked to us, and we learned a lot about that. And you know, in Berwick, power is 10% less than it is down the road. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about. We want to make sure that we have reliable power. We want to make sure that it comes at a good price. Our concern about the Premier's case of Muskrat Love is that we are going to be stuck with a power plan that costs us phenomenal amounts. We have no idea what this is going to cost. And you know what? None of us would enter into contracts, or hopefully would not enter into contracts, where we didn't know what the final cost was going to be. And yet we're asking Nova Scotian taxpayers to do exactly that. We have frequent power interruptions right now here in Nova Scotia, and we can all think back to when these have happened, and there's always different excuses of why it happened. It was, what is it, salty fog, or I'm not sure if that's a drink or it's an actual thing, but there are a variety of excuses. But Nova Scotians, I think, are deeply concerned about the lack of reliability. So our solution is that there should be penalties on the utility for when they don't perform up to snuff. And this is really about making Nova Scotia Power accountable to its customers. This legislation will mean a high level of service for Nova Scotians, and it ties the monopoly's hands so it cannot pass these fines on to the ratepayers of this province. This Liberal bill also creates a fund to receive payment of any fines levied against the NSP. And the fund would be overseen by the Minister of Finance, would be redirected to support improvements in electricity reliability, service restoration, and community electricity infrastructure, like backup generators. Compensation to ratepayers for losses caused by unreliable electricity services would also be paid out of this fund. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are tired of a government standing up for NSP and defending its monopoly. 7 times we've introduced a bill in this House that would allow for competition in a heavily regulated market. 7 times consecutive NDP and Conservative governments have refused to call this bill. A Liberal government will bring fairness back to power prices and break Nova Scotia's power monopoly. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to stand for a few minutes this evening and talk to Bill number 97 and offer a few comments. I want to start, Mr. Speaker, with talking about the title of this bill with regards to being fairness for Nova Scotians. Rather interesting. Mr. Speaker, we've introduced bills in this House, both opposition parties over the last couple of sittings, talking about the public utility and trying to make life better for Nova Scotians by way of introducing different bills, and we have done that. We've certainly done our share of that, but unfortunately, the process and the function of this House and the how things happen, I guess, don't allow opposition bills to get across the hall for discussion. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because there are times when it would make sense to call an opposition bill, and we've seen that in past years at times. But when you talk about something as important as power rates for Nova Scotians and all the interesting discussion that's taken place and the hardship that's been created by rate increase after rate increase after rate increase, Mr. Speaker, we have to consider how we're doing business in here and whether we're doing business in a way that's best suited and equally suited whereby all Nova Scotians are represented. Because as opposition members, Mr. Speaker, as you know, you really don't have the same opportunity to represent your constituents fully the same as you do if you are a member of government, because your bill is highly unlikely to make it any farther than the place from where I'm standing and being tabled, Mr. Speaker. So I think we can agree that there's some necessary changes, but more importantly, we can agree that there are changes needed to the Public Utilities Act and how things work. And I think that all parties and all members in this House are kind of open to that debate, and we've been sharing those ideas and have continued to share those ideas, and we'll share more of them as we move on in the next few minutes. But we talk about fairness, Mr. Speaker, and I find it interesting that we're going to talk about fairness, but yet we're going to allow a rate increase in January and another rate increase the January after that before we decide we're going to do anything about it. Mr. Speaker, we've, as I said, introduced bills that would reflect doing things a whole lot sooner than that. But that doesn't seem to be the will of this government, Mr. Speaker, in this province. To me, when we put forward ensuring fair power rates, it's the similar idea of a day late and a dollar short, Mr. Speaker, because it will be. There'll be more businesses that will have closed, stating high power cost is one of their issues. Mr. Speaker, there will be more families that will see things like bankruptcy take place. We will see more people go hungry in this province because they'll need to make a decision as to whether they're going to pay their power bill, which they need to have. They have to have their power. We've become accustomed to that, Mr. Speaker. This isn't the days of old. They need to have their power. They have children, Mr. Speaker. They have needs. They need heat. Many residents in Nova Scotia use power, electricity for heating. So we're going to see this continue. This is hardly something called fair power rates for anyone in this province, Mr. Speaker. By no means even close to being fair. Why not incorporate this bill effective immediately? Pass this bill. There are a couple of portions of this bill that may be worth looking at, Mr. Speaker. Take this over to law amendments, allow lots of other ideas to come forward, allow the opposition members some thoughts on this, some amendments that will likely come forward perhaps with opportunities to make the bill even stronger. Let's implement it right away. Why wait? Why let bills go up twice more before we see any kind of relief? Mr. Speaker, that is not by any stretch of the imagination fair to Nova Scotians. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know and we've heard in this House multiple times that power rates have gone up 25% in the last 3 years, with the potential for another 5, 6, 7%, who knows, in the years ahead. We talk about the Newfoundland project, Mr. Speaker, in Muskrat Falls, and government has tried to sell this to members of this House and to all Nova Scotians, as has Nova Scotia Power, as this being a wonderful project. They talk about this project consisting of long-term sustainable power rates, Mr. Speaker, but yet, when asked multiple times in this House, what will that rate be, they're unable to answer the question. I think the people want to know if they're being told something that is supposedly good for them, fair for them, and maybe it is. People are still very skeptical. They're open-minded. They want to hear exactly what it is that government is referring to, that Nova Scotia Power is referring to, that's so good about this deal, Mr. Speaker. And as I talk about that and the deal, potential deal for Newfoundland, we saw last week and was discussed in this House, and questions were asked about the increase already of another more than $1 billion on this project. There are some that would say this project will go even farther, and there are many that will admit, Mr. Speaker, that really it would be expected that the project would grow in cost. What the final figure will be is anyone's guess. But what we also know, Mr. Speaker, based on that, and when we're talking about fairness to ratepayers, is that Nova Scotia Power has already said, government has already said, cost overruns will come on the backs of the ratepayers in the province of Nova Scotia. They cannot sustain that. And when they already don't know the current cost of the now $7.4 billion project, what the rates will be, how will they know what the rates will be or see this as a fair deal for long-term sustainable energy if it goes up another billion, $2 or $3 billion, maybe over $10 billion before it's all said and done? Who really knows? What we do know, though, Mr. Speaker, is if you talk to Newfoundlanders, and I have been talking to a couple, and one who was a former politician in the Newfoundland, province of Newfoundland, states that Newfoundlanders are not happy with Muskrat Falls. Now, it would be interesting to see some real documentation based on that, and I'm sure it exists. There have been studies to say this project is costing too much, that Newfoundland, the province itself, Newfoundlanders cannot afford this kind of capital investment, nor do they need it, Mr. Speaker, because they know that their energy needs will be met by way of a deal that's been coming to an end, I believe 2041. The deal that was signed with Quebec will end and Newfoundland will own the full rights. There was another project that was to be looked at, Mr. Speaker, to top that up and to give Newfoundlanders all the energy that they would require. Yet we see a deal now, or trying to get a deal together with Nalcor and with Nova Scotia Power, Mr. Speaker, that we're a long ways from. This deal may never come to fruition in Newfoundland. What will the government do for a fallback? There doesn't appear to be any other plan. We're on straightforward ahead course for the Newfoundland deal with Nalcor and Nova Scotia Power. We don't seem to be looking at any other alternatives. And we've suggested, Mr. Speaker, many alternatives. Every alternative should be looked at for our future energy needs in the province of Nova Scotia and how we could reach that, how we could meet the goals of Nova Scotians at peak times and demand times and other times, Mr. Speaker. We should be looking at every option, yet we continue to focus on only one. And the problem, of course, with that one is that it is hardly fair, especially when we can't put a price tag on it, Mr. Speaker. Now, people are being faced with tough decisions. Will they stay in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker? We know a lot of people who are traveling to the west, Mr. Speaker, traveling west, working for 2 or 3 weeks or a month at a time, coming home for a couple of weeks, going back out, and some have been doing that for years in order to try to make a living and to pay the high cost of living in Nova Scotia, high taxes, high power rates, and it goes on, Mr. Speaker. There are, unfortunately, job losses continue to occur in this province. Businesses are stating why that is, Mr. Speaker. Energy is a key factor for those companies who are finding it very, very difficult, whether they be small business or larger businesses or everyday ratepayers. All Nova Scotia ratepayers are affected. The bill ensuring fair power rates does nothing to meet the needs of everyday Nova Scotians and businesses in the province of Nova Scotia anytime soon. That's one of the biggest problems with it. If we really want to do something, let's implement a bill with some real value, and let's do it right now. If there was something worthy in this bill of putting forward, Mr. Speaker, and it was worth putting forward right now, we would be talking in favor of it. Unfortunately, it's not. We continue to see, as I said, businesses struggle. We know that jobs have been lost. Mr. Speaker, we saw another 135 announced last week, unfortunately, in Hansport. Those people are going to be wondering when their jobs come to an end at the end of December this year, how they're going to face the next year. And let's hope, and we'll be looking for commitments and hope for other kind of diverse economics to come in, jobs perhaps to be created, yet we've not seen many, Mr. Speaker. So on the minds of all those people will be, how are we going to make ends meet? How are we going to pay our bills? How are we going to feed our families? And they'll be thinking about the power bills. And lo and behold, come January, as soon as they're laid off, what's one of the very first things that they're going to be faced with? They're going to be faced with an increase in their power bill, Mr. Speaker. 3% perhaps, as has been requested. Maybe it'll be less than that. We can only hope. But we should be talking about no rate increases right now, Mr. Speaker. Zero. We are in a tough time in this province for all Nova Scotians. You can talk to small business owners. I do it on a regular basis. I stop in, I visit them, and we talk to the larger businesses. I'll often stop into everyday businesses in the town of Windsor, one of the areas I represent, Mr. Speaker, and they will share with us there's reasons they can't hire more employees. things like power rates and trying to make enough money in their businesses. Some of them don't even draw a salary, Mr. Speaker. They're just trying to survive, hoping for a better day when maybe job creation will be allowed to happen. But things like a 25% increase over 3 years doesn't give Nova Scotians much to look forward to, especially when we look at the words ensure fairer power rates, Mr. Speaker. There's nothing there that gives any assurances when we're still allowing power rate increases to happen. Who would want to come here and start business up? You know, we talk about all these great ideas, or at least we talk around ideas about job creation. We haven't seen much of it, Mr. Speaker, and those that have been put forward have by no means been moving along quickly. Been delay after delay after delay. Why would that be, Mr. Speaker? I think energy probably has some key factor in that as to why people are holding off. We await construction projects to start, nothing going on. We hear about other businesses, Mr. Speaker. We hear about Trenton. There's not much going on. Where are all the people? We hear about the Ship Start Here project, Mr. Speaker. Why are the things not underway? Has energy got a factor in all of those things? That is an added cost. We know that. But if we're going to see jobs expand, if we're going to see companies expand, or new, better yet, entrepreneurs in Nova Scotia and from away come here to start a business opportunity, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Richmond. The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of privilege. Mr. Speaker, I've just been handed this note here. It's 8:29 p.m. advising that there's a meeting of the Law Amendments Committee taking place at 8:30 p.m. this evening. Mr. Speaker, as a member of this House for 14 years, I've never seen a committee being called with such short notice, which obviously takes away our rights and privileges as members of this House to be prepared, our staff to be prepared, and to actively participate in such a meeting. While I realize that in the past the Speaker's office has been reluctant to get involved in the affairs of a committee, in this case, I would suggest to you that if this is allowed to take place, a precedent will be set, whereas the government of the day, whether this be government or any other government, can call a standing committee's meeting with 5 minutes notice. In my case, I got 1 minute's notice officially delivered to me by the page to prepare for a meeting. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you rule that this meeting not take place this evening. We're more than happy to attend such a meeting tomorrow, which would be the normal procedure following the passage of a bill here in this House. To have law amendments meet immediately after, within minutes basically, of a bill being passed, I believe sets a terrible precedent, because there are many members of the public, Mr. Speaker, that wish to follow the proceedings of the Law Amendments Committee on Bill 94. So not only do I believe members are being denied that, I know that our other member of the committee is not present and is therefore unable to even receive notice this evening. So we need to find a replacement as well. Nova Scotians who wish to follow these proceedings are not being granted the opportunity to follow the discussions that take place. There's only you, Mr. Speaker, that can intervene in this matter. There is no other means for us to do so. The government has a majority on the committee, therefore our complaints there can easily be shut down. I would, therefore, I leave it to you in your office to, for tonight at least, while you review this ruling, to ask that that meeting not take place, to give you time to adequately review this point of privilege as to whether a meeting with such short notice should be permitted to take place this evening.
Thank you. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, well, I understand some of the argument that the member has made. The reality is that this has been discussed both formally and informally, and they knew that both parties knew that this is what the government was contemplating, and you know, now they're saying that they're feigning indifference. Mr. Speaker, they knew this was going to happen, and I believe we're well within our right to call the meeting.
The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I too, you know, at the last possible minute, get a notice. I know the government House Leader is saying that we had prior notice of this, but we did not. We were under the assumption that it would happen tomorrow. You know, this is happening at the last possible minute. This is a very difficult situation, and I ask for your ruling on this.
Well, I think that's a matter of utmost importance at this time. So I think I'm going to take a short little recess, consider my decision and consider with my staff. Is that okay with all the members in here? Thank you. We will now take a short recess, and I'll let the whips know when I'm ready to come back, if that's possible. So we'll now take a short recess.